We are here with Jacqui Banaszynski. She's a journalism legend, a Pulitzer Prize winner and teacher and editor. Welcome to RFI Romania.
Thank you, Andrea. It's nice to be here.
It's nice to finally talk with you because I've heard so much about you during the last 2 years. The Power of Storytelling conference is back after 5 years with its 10th edition, and it's taking place this weekend. Out of 10 editions, you only missed one.
Yes,
And
yes.
you helped start the conference back in 2011. What drew you to it, and why do you still come back here today?
Oh, that's
Do you love Romania so much?
I do. That's a hard question to answer. And I get asked that all the time in the United States when people say, where are you going? And I say to Romania, and they're like, where is Romania?
Europe?
And I'm like, yeah, look at a map. I knew Christian Lupsha, who started the conference. I met him when he was a student at the University of Missouri, where I was teaching. And after he came back here, he reached out to me because he wanted to teach the kind of journalism he had learned at Missouri. And he said, can you help me with that? And I said, sure. And so we spent time back and forth talking. And then he decided to start the magazine and start the conference. But it was kind of last minute. He needed some speakers. He reached out to me because I know a lot of the journalists in the United States. And I came, and I had come once before to work with his staff. And there's something about this place that draws me. I can't really tell you what it is, except I like the young people I met here, your generation and younger, those Gen Zs, all seem to have this spirit of creativity. And this is indeed the best conference I've ever attended. And I've attended hundreds. So in part it's because I would do pretty much anything for Christian and his crew, but it's also because I always leave here inspired.
We will send them the recording to know. No pressure. Your career spans 50 years, and you've reported stories from all 7 continents, from Ethiopia to Antarctica. What did all that traveling for research and work bring you as a professional and as a person?
Oh, good question. I think it taught me not to assume that my way of seeing the world is the right way. When Americans travel, because of the status the U.S. has always had for the last 80 years at least, it's really easy for Americans to see the world through an American perspective and narrative. And when I've traveled to other places, I've had to learn to set that aside and try to understand that other people see the world through their own perspective and experience, which is really valuable for a journalist, because that's what we try to do, or should try to do in every story we tell, is see the story from the experience of the person we're reporting about, not through our own. And every place I've gone, I've met these amazing people who are doing crazy things, dog sled expeditions, and people who are trying to keep their families together in famines. And it's been remarkable. I've been very, very fortunate.
Do you feel like journalism today takes a different approach to reporting, to spending time on the field? Personally, I spend very much time here in our open space, in front of my computer.
Yes. Sadly, yes. And I get asked that question a lot, even in the U.S. when I work with younger journalists at workshops. They're like, well, we can't get out of the office. So we talk a lot about how you can work by remote. You can work by Zoom or work by your phone, Facebook, messaging, whatever. But it's not the same as being in the field. And so this is happening at the same time the industry is contracting. You know, the cuts are terrible to the press around the world, but in the U.S. also. But I think people can figure out ways to get in the field on the stories that really matter, and in shorter ways than they think they have to have. You can do a lot in the field in 2 hours if you're somewhere and you're really paying attention and really witnessing and really observing and really listening. You can do a lot in 2 hours. You don't need 2 weeks or 2 months.
That's true, but you also have to have an exercise.
Yeah. And you have to support from your management. You know, you have to have someone who's willing to let you go do that. And that's what I think we're missing now, are the editors who say, the story's not in the newsroom, it's out there, so go. go. And that was the world I grew up in. If we were in the newsroom, the editor would get angry and say, go find a story, and we'd have to leave.
What do you feel about AI? Is that a threat or not?
I'm not a fan so far. I think it could be an amazing tool to help us in all kinds of ways, especially medical advancements, technological advances that would help us as a society. I don't think we can control it. I think we've already lost that battle. It's way ahead of us, and so it's going to take jobs. And I think the threat to journalism is enormous.
Why?
Well, the people who use it say it's a really great tool. It's faster than Google. It's more expansive. You can find all kinds of stuff out very quickly. But
you still have to go see for yourself if it's accurate what it delivers.
One hopes, but if the newsroom is cut and cut and cut, and you don't have time, a lot of newsrooms are now simply saying AI is going to do this kind of work for us. They're going to do these sorts of stories. We're just going to go straight to AI. I think that's very dangerous. Very, very dangerous. So I'm so far not a fan. I don't know if I ever will be, but I don't think I have to worry about it too much because I'm old. I'm not going to last long enough for it to really be a threat to me. But, it's very problematic. There was a story I read just today that said the tech people from OpenAI are making the argument that they should be able to get past copyright laws and take material from creative people, journalists directly in order to feed AI. And so they're saying copyright laws in our way and we want to get rid of it. Well, that's a threat. That's a big threat.
I agree. You taught at Missouri Journalism School and at the Poynter Institute, and you've edited countless young journalists. What is something they taught you?
Oh, well, the wonderful thing about teaching is that you learn every day. I heard this thing once years and years ago, which I've never forgotten, and it's that you teach what you need to learn.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about that, it's very, very
like
interesting. Yeah. And so when you teach, to me, teaching was an extension of reporting because I'd have to listen really hard to figure out what each student needed, where they were, how I could help them. And that was true whether they were actual students still in school or young professionals or even mid-career professionals, because they each have their own challenges. And then, my job was to say, well, how can I help you with that challenge? But I can't assume I know the answer until I know what they're struggling with. So every time I did that, I would learn more, not only how they saw the world, again, like when I traveled, but also I would learn more about my profession and the craft, because I would have to then be able to articulate it, break it down, give people its component parts, tell them how it works. And in order to do that, I had to know how it works. So I had to go back and study the actual foundations of stories.
Do you think that nowadays journalists are able to listen, or they just have these strong opinions?
Oh, wow.
And are biased?
I think it depends on the journalist. More and more journalists are being pushed to social media where they do have a very strong perspective and opinion. I think at the mainstream, independent, I know you use those terms differently here, but at the mainstream newsrooms in the U.S., like the New York Times and the Washington Post and the paper where I live, the Seattle Times, the working reporters still very much are working as straightforward journalists who are trying to get the information, verify the information, put it in context. If you look at TV, it's different. National Public Radio, I think, is very strong in the U.S. It's very straightforward. But you have to draw a distinction between the reporters and then the opinion writers. And more people are getting into that world of opinion.
Yeah. What is the difference between the mainstream and independent media in the U.S. versus Europe?
Well, I was talking to Ioana earlier, and she mentioned independent press, and it almost sounded to me like it was outside of the mainstream press, the institutional press. And in the U.S., we use that term as the press that isn't beholden to government. So the mainstream press, the New York Times is an independent newspaper. It doesn't get money from the government, and it's not beholden to the government. It's a mainstream newspaper, but it's independent. Same is true of public radio. Same is true of ProPublica. So we use the terms mainstream and independent somewhat interchangeably. The difference is, for us, is you can be an independent, you can have an independent news organization that is not in the mainstream, which means it's a startup. It's newer. And it's kind of off on its own and then learning to grow. But those become very quickly part of the mainstream because they're not. Fox News, for example, is very much in cahoots with the government.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't call them an independent news station. I just wouldn't.
I understand. Thank you for explaining better to me. You won the Pulitzer Prize in 1988 for a groundbreaking series about a gay couple dying of AIDS in rural America at a time during the AIDS epidemic when newspapers weren't putting gay people on the covers, and certainly not in a positive light. What would you tell journalists covering the community nowadays when the wheel seems to be spinning backwards?
Yeah.
And there's a target on the LGBT communities back again. Actually, Hungary just canceled Pride.
Yeah. And in the U.S., I have many gay friends who are worried that gay marriage, which is now part of the Constitution, will be reversed.
Transgender people just are starting to get their IDs with the original.
Yeah, and there was a horrible, horrible story a month ago about a transgender person who was held captive for a month and then beaten to death, tortured. What would I tell people? I would probably tell them that they might look to starting. When I was coming up in the mainstream press, there was a very robust gay press. It wasn't underground so much as it was very much a gay press, and I got a lot of story ideas and tips and sources from that. But it's one way that community found its voice. I would tell them to show up at public meetings. I would tell them to get very politically active, to not take things for granted. You know, when Roe v. Wade, the right to abortion passed in the United States, I think people who believed in the right to choice took it for granted that now it's safe. Well, 50 years later, it got taken away. And I think the LGBT community needs to do the same thing. They need to fight every battle that takes away their rights.
But what can journalists do?
Journalists can tell that story. They can listen. They can pay attention. They can realize that there's a cascading event. And if you go after this person today, you might go after the next person tomorrow and the next person the next day. And so I think that story. The other thing the press can do is, let's just deal with the transgender issue, which has been one of the targets of the Trump administration and the campaign before his election. And they made a big deal about transgender athletes, basically trans women playing on women's teams. It's a tiny, tiny, tiny percentage of people. It's like not an issue out in the world, but they made it an issue. And the press should be giving those numbers. And so every time the administration pushes and says X, Y, and Z, the press should put that in the context of reality and say, yes, this is what they said. This is the truth. This is how many people this affects.
I was reading that actually there is a very small percentage of trans athletes that actually win when running, when competing.
Yes, and a very small percentage who compete at any kind of elite level. It's a tiny number of people. I don't know the statistics myself accurately, but if I were still covering those issues, I'd make darn sure I knew the numbers. I'd make sure I knew where those programs existed and how people in those local schools, those local communities felt about it before I just spouted what the administration was saying. We have to put things in context. That takes time and it takes work.
You famously said retirement is a barca lounger watching Law and Order isn't for you. What milestones do you still want to hit?
Oh, I don't know. I just sort of semi-retired. I left my last kind of formal job 6 months ago. And I'm still figuring that out. And frankly, I've been so distracted by what's happening in D.C. and the White House and internationally that I haven't figured out much, except I want to clean my garage because my garage is a mess. And
Good luck on that. Maybe you'll get another job before.
Yeah. And, a lot of people say you should write a book. I don't know. I'm not there yet. Maybe I'll get there. I'm doing more and more teaching, and I like it more and more, so I might just do more of that. So milestones, I don't feel like I need more milestones. I never set out to have any anyway, and so I'm not looking for that kind of achievement anymore.
Thank you very much for being here.
You're welcome. Thank you.